The Nintendo Switch has been long overdue for an upgrade. As an 8-year-old handheld, it's a marvel that it can still play modern games as well as it can. It's just that the cracks in performance have been showing for a few years now. Luckily, the Nintendo Switch 2 has now arrived with a refined design and large jump in performance. Over the past month or so, I've had a blast playing the new and updated games launching with the system, and honestly, it's exactly what I wanted out of a Switch sequel. It's just that, unlike in 2017, Nintendo is no longer alone in the market. Even if the Switch 2 is already massively outselling its largest portable competitors, Windows and Linux handhelds are now available as potential alternatives for gamers' mindshare. Well, that is if they dare to venture past gaming on their phones. Given the rise of premium handhelds for premium prices, many folks will likely be facing the decision of either buying into Nintendo's new platform or spending the money elsewhere. Which creates the question, for $450, is the Switch 2 the best handheld you can buy? And, well, yes. But also no. But also, yes? To explain what I mean, let's first look at the Switch 2's hardware. Sporting a 7.9-inch 1080p 120Hz display with support for HDR10 up to 500 nits and variable refresh rate, it already has the specs of a much more expensive handheld. While I'd like a bit more brightness for gameplay in direct sunlight, it's a generally good display that looks vibrant and feels more than capable compared to my original Switches, Steam Deck, or even Flip DS. Of course, the contrast doesn't quite compare to handhelds with an OLED display, but I don't really think it's something most folks will notice without comparing side by side. After many weeks playing my Switch 2, I don't feel like going back to my Switch OLED anytime soon. That is, unless I need a much more packable handheld. My Switch 2 is noticeably bigger than my OLED. And in general, that has added to the new device's overall handheld comfort for me, but it does have some downsides for placing in a bag. Now, don't get me wrong, the Switch 2 is still extremely portable. It's still not as big and bulky as my Steam Deck or many other horizontal handheld PCs on the market. With a decent case, it also manages to easily pack flat. It's just that it's much larger than it used to be. Part of the appeal of my Switch OLED over my Steam Deck was that I could easily take it with me while out and about in Chicago. The Switch 2 kinda eliminates that benefit, and, well, it's sorely missed. On the brighter side of things, the Switch 2 picks up other, better features from modern handhelds. There are now 2 USB-C ports instead of 1, and unlike another handheld I own, both can be used for charging and USB accessories. It sucks that only the bottom port handles display out for supported docks, but as someone who only docks to capture gameplay footage, I really couldn't care less. Being able to charge from multiple angles has been a godsend, as has having an extra port to hook up a webcam, USB mouse, or keyboard whenever I want. The Switch 2 also adds faster storage, though it's not quite as ideal as other handhelds. These days, handheld PCs use standard M.2 drives. They're high capacity, compact, and easy to replace if something goes wrong. Here, it's still soldered permanent storage, albeit 256 gigabytes of UFS storage, which is more in line with modern Android tablets. On the bright side, that's still a huge upgrade from the original Switch's slower 32 or 64 gigabytes of eMMC storage. Given that Switch games are typically 10 to 30-ish gigabytes a piece, I'm guessing most folks will find that built-in storage more than enough for a couple dozen games, even without an upgrade. But having the option still would have been nice. Though if expandable storage is needed, the Switch 2 uniquely supports microSD express cards. While Nintendo's support comes with the downside of not allowing regular microSD cards, which is a pain, express cards should be much faster than the SD cards used by other handhelds. Not sure how much of a difference it'll make in the short term. However, considering the Switch 1 lasted 8 years on the market, it's likely to be a long-term benefit for the platform's developers. All of that is bundled with a new custom processor from NVIDIA. The raw performance on display by this chipset is a huge leap from the original Switch. Games that once had difficulty maintaining a stable frame rate are now rock solid. Combined with faster loading in many games, it's a great excuse for folks to revisit the Switch library. Compared to other handhelds on the market, it also feels fairly competitive. As the one Switch 2 game I have across multiple platforms, Cyberpunk 2077 has been a good test case for me. On my LCD Steam Deck, I get around 50-ish FPS with frequent dips to around 35 on the Steam Deck preset, while maxed out at 15-watt TDP. Meanwhile, my Aya Neo Flip DS can drive the same game well above 60 FPS at 20 plus watts at similar settings. My Switch 2 doesn't have any frame rate counters, but feels solid and fluid with no notable dip in performance in the few hours I've played. Compared to those other handhelds, performance isn't mind-blowing by any stretch, but it feels about in the same ballpark. Add in the various gameplay optimizations, capped frame rate, and VRR, and between my three handhelds, I think I might honestly prefer the Switch 2 version. Which is exciting, even more so considering that the Switch 2 has similar or better battery life compared to those other handhelds, despite having half the battery capacity. To exceed the performance of my Switch 2, both my Steam Deck and Flip DS need to be at settings where SteamOS reports drawing well over 25 watts. With their 40 watt-hour batteries, that means draining a full charge in up to about 90 minutes. Meanwhile, Digital Foundry measures the Switch 2's battery capacity at about 20 watt-hours. Considering I've noticed about 2.5 hours of gameplay in Cyberpunk, that it plays power draw during handheld play for a Nintendo system at around 7 watts, maybe a bit more. That's frankly insane. Attempting to even just set the TDP of my other handhelds at 7 watts results in the game running much worse. Plus, if I try to optimize settings to at least get up to 2.5 hours of battery, performance is a bit worse than the Switch 2, even while the fans are very noticeable on all but the Switch 2. Clearly, between Nvidia's new chipset and CD Projekt Red's optimizations, there's some magic going on here that just isn't possible with other handhelds at the moment. Even for folks with no desire to get a Switch 2, that should really make them want to see another ARM-based handheld with an Nvidia processor. Which is really the crux of that first instinctual, yes, the Switch 2 is the best handheld you can buy for the money. Its specs punch far above its weight with more than promising performance and efficiency for a handheld so slim. Give developers a bit more time, and that sentiment will only grow in validity. Compare that to the LCD Steam Deck, the one other handheld regularly priced under $500 that also targets modern games, and, well, its display is lower resolution, lower frame rate, and lower visual quality. Performance is good, but potentially not as great in the long run. Combine that with the larger size and extra heft, and it's easy to make an argument that a Switch 2 is actually pretty good value for someone on a budget compared to the other option on the market. But, and there is a huge but here, there are other factors that might make some folks shy away from the Switch 2, namely controls and ergonomics. I touched on this quite a bit in my Joy-Con 2 review, but in summary, the Joy-Con 2s are better in just about every way compared to the original Joy-Cons. Larger, better feeling sticks and buttons combined with some improved motion and haptics go a long way toward making the Switch 2 feel like a high quality handheld. It's just that Joy-Con 2s don't fare well when comparing them to most other full-sized handhelds on the market. Again, comparing to the Steam Deck, Joy-Con 2s don't exactly feel bad, but they also don't feel like a full-size controller. As much as I love how much their form factor leans into the Switch's versatility, it's hard to pick Joy-Con input over a Steam Deck's textured stick caps, dedicated D-pad, and analog triggers. There's a ton of room here for Nintendo to create a pro version of Joy-Cons with much more premium controls. However, as it stands, I can't exactly say they're the most comfortable gaming experience next to other handheld control schemes. That goes doubly for ergonomics. The Switch 2 is a completely flat handheld. The flatness has the benefit of allowing it to slot into its dedicated dock, but it comes with the drawback of having nowhere to put my hands. Even while playing less intense games like Pokemon Violet, I've found my hands start to cramp within a few hours if I'm not holding the system in just the right way. Unlike some other flat handhelds I own, it's also just a bit too big to comfortably brace it with my fingers. It's not great. Compare that to most other large handhelds out there today, and things look even more dire. Handhelds like the Steam Deck, ROG Ally, and Lenovo Legion Go all have designs that emphasize portions of the shell to create as comfortable a handheld experience as possible. As seen in the images of Xbox's upcoming handheld, manufacturers know that grips are insanely important for the comfort of a handheld and long-term satisfaction of players. I could nitpick my Steam Deck all day and call it bulky and kind of heavy, but picking it up feels immediately better than what Nintendo has ever had to offer since 2017. There is one large caveat to the Switch 2's poor ergonomics. Unlike all those other handhelds, the Switch 2 has controllers that can be heavily modified or outright replaced. As much as I love the feel of my kill switch case on my Steam Deck, it'd be difficult for any third party to comfortably modify the handheld's grips further in a way that actually mattered. What you see is what you get, and if you pick up an ROG Ally and hate how flat its grips are or dislike the button arrangement on your Lenovo Legion Go, you kinda just have to live with it. That's not the case with the Switch 2. Third-party manufacturers like Dbrand, Mechanism, and Genki have already launched products that heavily modify Joy-Con 2 grips. These modifications range from simple, swappable grips on the back to full-on sculpted rubber. Unlike other handhelds, users have a lot of freedom to choose their own look and feel. Plus, if you don't like the Joy-Con 2s, they can be swapped for a different controller altogether. While I haven't seen any examples announced yet, the Switch 1 had a multitude of Joy-Con replacements from companies like MobaPad, which completely reshaped the look and feel of the console. The big downside to all this is that for as many modifications as there are, all of them cost money. The Attack Vector grip case Genki sent me costs $50. Meanwhile, the MobaPad M6 HDs I use with my Switch OLED are $80. As ad hoc upgrades over time, that's mostly fine, but if someone needed to buy either option to feel comfortable playing on their system, that changes the calculus. After all, once we go from $450 to $500 or $550, you also start to get into the range of the upgraded Steam Deck OLED or the newer Lenovo Legion Go S. Both have much better grips out of the box and may have better performance or other creature comforts for certain games. So yeah, while the Switch 2's hardware is fantastic, it's also not the most comfortable handheld with the most comfortable set of controls, which is a big deal for any handheld. While I personally prize the flexibility the Joy-Con 2s bring to the table, it's hard to necessarily recommend to someone a handheld that they might need third-party solutions to make comfortable to play for long periods of time. At least, that is, depending on how they've felt about the last point to consider, the game library. As is the typical cop-out with Nintendo systems, if you're interested in Nintendo's first-party games, the Switch 2 is a no-brainer. Those games are exclusive to the system and tend to run best on the system, so just buy the system. And I know some folks will comment, "Oh, but I can already emulate Tears of the Kingdom on my Steam Deck better than a Switch 1. Why would I ever buy Nintendo hardware?" To which I'd say, folks, I'm no stranger to emulation. I know perfectly well the extent to which many Switch games run on these other systems, and it's not really comparable. In a few years, emulation might be better, but for now, Switch emulation still takes far too much setup, tinkering, and living with bugs to really call better than the original hardware. And that's without even getting into the emulator compatibility issues or the fact that the Switch 2 has exclusive games to the system. So yeah, if you want to play Nintendo's own games or system exclusives, Switch 2 is a great option. And that's bolstered by the fact that they can be bought packaged on a cartridge that typically require no wait times or large downloads or constant internet connections to validate licenses. Compared to other handhelds, the sheer convenience of being able to bypass storage constraints and physically manage a library is actually quite useful these days. That'll be especially handy for Switch 1 games in the coming years. The Switch 2's cartridge slot is backwards compatible with all Switch 1 games, or at least all the ones I've tried from my collection. Many of the most popular games can already be found at a discount by taking a trip to a local game shop, browsing eBay, or just keeping an eye on Target's clearance section. They'll likely get even cheaper as time progresses. And the Switch 2 is a perfect handheld to play almost all of those games, even if all games don't immediately have boosted performance. To increase stability on original hardware, many Switch 1 games are heavily optimized with locked resolution and frame rate. That effectively means that you won't immediately feel a huge jump in performance in many games. Fortunately, the Switch 2's better specs will still shine through more often than not. Load times are a bit quicker, frame rates are more stable, and certain games even show more detail thanks to the extra resources available. Certain games might look a little less crisp when upscaled to a 1080p display while playing handheld, but it likely won't be a deal breaker for most folks. Not to mention, many of the most popular games on Switch 1 have already started to receive updates to take advantage of the new hardware. First-party games like ARMS, Splatoon 3, and Super Mario Odyssey all look impressively sharp with extra frame rate boosts where able. Of course, that's outside the graphical and performance overhauls to Pokémon Violet and dedicated Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and No Man's Sky. For interested developers, Nintendo's new hardware is an easy excuse to breathe new life into older games and potentially boost sales years after launch. Even with only a few Switch 2 exclusives currently on the market, there's plenty for folks to sink their teeth into. There are some hitches though. The main one is that if you're like me and already have a Switch 1 and have played a ton of its games to death, there might be little value in upgrading in the near future. Some of the Switch 2 games, like Mario Kart World and Bravely Default HD, are fantastic and suck up a bunch of my free time, but I wouldn't blame someone for waiting a year or so to let additional games release and prove out the platform's value. The other hitch is all about availability. Throughout this video, I've compared my Switch 2 to my LCD Steam Deck. In many ways, the Switch 2 feels like a stronger system right now, but it's hard to overlook the fact that the Steam Deck has access to more games, and often that access isn't kept behind potentially bad optimizations or hopes that a game will come to a closed platform. Newer, graphically intense games on handheld PCs may not run or look the best, but there are enough settings to let me fiddle as I please and choose which factors I want to settle on. With Switch 2, developers have to be interested in bringing a game to the platform, and then I have to hope that they've optimized the game well. Some real magic can be done with Switch hardware, but there are plenty of bad ports that don't quite show off what the handhelds have to offer. For that reason, yes, the Switch 2 is a great handheld for the price, but maybe not if you have no interest in its exclusive library, or if you already own one of the 150+ million Switches that have sold in the past 8 years. That could change in the coming years, especially as Switch 2 prices inevitably drop, but right now that's kind of the state of things. To wrap up this video, let's return to the question at the top. For $450, is the Switch 2 the best handheld you can buy? Based on everything I've gone over so far, the answer is yes. For under $500, the Switch 2 is a very nice looking handheld with solid performance and efficiency. Compared to the one other handheld in the same price range, it offers a better display, more USB-C ports, and a more compact experience. If you're looking for a better performing handheld with better specs, you'll likely be paying at least $100 more. But also, no, it's not the most comfortable handheld you can get. Its flat shape causes some extra poor ergonomics that would be deal breakers on any other handheld. The only saving grace here is that the Joy-Con 2s can be modified or swapped with third-party solutions to meet users' needs. Given that those extra mods increase the price point quite a bit though, it's arguable if it'd be better to just not bother and buy a more comfortable handheld in the first place. But even still, yes, it's certainly the best handheld for anyone interested in the Switch 1's library or any future exclusive games. Many older games now run better than before, with some even updated to look and feel like entirely new games. That praise is also a double-edged sword though, because anyone not interested in the Switch 1 library or first-party games likely still has no reason to pick up a Switch 2. Based on Nintendo's latest directs, third-party support could be strong over time. However, more games will ultimately be available with more flexibility from a competing handheld, like a Steam Deck. Squashed together, personal preference is still key here, obviously. As someone who really enjoys Nintendo's first-party games, loves how lightweight the Switch 2 feels next to other handhelds, and does not mind swapping out Joy-Cons in the future, the Switch 2 very much tops my list of modern handhelds. If you're someone who agrees with that sentiment, you'll likely have a great time picking one up for yourself. Alternatively, if you've been yelling at the screen this entire time that obviously other handhelds are better and games on Switch 2 don't look that great, that's perfectly fine. That likely means you just don't need to buy a Switch 2. Unlike at the original Switch's launch, you now have the choice of what flavor of handheld you want and what operating system you want to use. Use that as clarifying information if you were on the fence. Still, I think we can all agree that Nintendo putting out a decently performant handheld at a relatively cheap price point compared to the rest of the handheld market right now is a good thing. Increased competition from a mainstream player could put some pressure on other handheld manufacturers to lower prices or offer better features. Those who are on a budget and can't afford an ROG Ally X or even a Steam Deck OLED could benefit from the extra competition in the long run. At the end of the day, when companies release good, reasonable hardware, we all win. Those have been my thoughts though. Now's the time when I ask for yours. Have you picked up a Switch 2, or are you interested in buying one but have additional questions? Let me know down in the comments. As always, if you found this video interesting or informative, go ahead and give it a like to let me know, then get subscribed for more handheld related videos in the near future. Switch 2 products from both Genki and Fastnail were both featured in this video. Genki sent me a case, grip, and a few other accessories just out of the blue. Meanwhile, Fastnail provided their split Joy-Con grips for use during my Switch 2 coverage. Neither company had any input into the making of this video. They're seeing it for the first time alongside y'all. I'll have links in the description if you want to check out either of those. Also, longtime viewers may have noticed that I sidestepped talking about the wide swath of Android devices, which are certainly much cheaper than the Switch 2, even at the high end. That's because they're fundamentally serving a different market. Folks often buy Android devices for emulation or as a dedicated mobile gaming machine. There's some overlap there, but once we start talking about running games like Cyberpunk, Mario Kart World, or Another Crab's Treasure, that all just kind of goes out the window. But yeah. Go watch my Retroid Pocket Flip 2 review if you want more Android handheld info. For now, that's going to be all for this video. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. Until next time, catch you later.